at a time. Bite one starts on page 1. Quote, the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Quote, the special counsel's investigation established that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election principally through 2 operations. First, a Russian entity carried out a social media campaign that favored presidential candidate Donald J. Trump and disparaged presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Second, a Russian intelligence service conducted computer intrusion operations against entities, employees, and volunteers working on the Clinton campaign, and then released stolen documents.
Okay, so what a random time of night for me to even be awake. But just to explain, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Easy Reapers Fish Room, where I woke up in the middle of the night and realized my dog was missing because I let him outside and forgot to bring him back inside. So I frantically went and peed and got my jacket and my shoes and got my car keys, was ready to drive up to the road and start yelling and clapping at 3 o'clock in the morning. Dingo! And when I first woke up, I went outside and like, Dingo, oh shit, he's really gone. Went looked through the house. Then I had to pee. By the time I got done getting my clothes, getting my jacket, getting my socks, I already had socks on, getting my slippers on top of my socks. By the time I did all that, went outside, and there's Dingo standing right at the bottom of the stairs. I don't know where the hell he was, but he's just hanging out outside for 4 or 5 hours while I slept on the couch. And then I looked at the clock, 3:20. I'm like, oh fuck. It's 4:20 on the East Coast on 4:20. So why don't I just make a little 4:20 broadcast? Cause fuck it. So welcome one and all back to the Easy Reapers Fish Room of Science, where we are going to be listening to Rachel Maddow discussing the Mueller report. This video, if you want to check it out, it's called Robert Mueller Report, a roadmap for charging Donald Trump with obstruction, on the Rachel Maddow's upload. Mr. Conway, good morning, sir.
The investigation also identified
Look at you showing up as one viewer.
Between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. The investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian methods. In terms of how the Russians did what they did and why they did it precisely the way they did it, this part right at the start of the report stands out to me still like it is written in light in the night sky. The Internet Research Agency, IRA, carried out the earliest Russian interference operations identified by the investigation. A social media campaign designed to provoke and amplify political and social discord in the United States. The IRA used social media accounts and interest groups to sow discord in the U.S. political system through what it termed information warfare. The campaign evolved from a generalized program designed in 2014 and 2015 to undermine the U.S. electoral system to a targeted operation that by early
2014 and 2015. Back when I was the only one saying anything about it. There it is in the Mueller report. 2014 and 2015. I remember those years. 2014 was support Ukraine on Facebook. 2015 was when we made this here channel.
Favored candidate Trump and disparaged candidate Clinton. Okay, just think about that evolution for a second. Think about what Russia's doing and why they did it. I mean, why was Russia bothering to do this? We now know from this unredacted part of Mueller's report that Russia doesn't start out trying to figure out a way to make Donald Trump president. That's not their project.
Right.
They start out trying to sow discord in the U.S. political system. They start out trying to...
Well, even before the Republican primaries.
They are trying to hurt the United States.
I was pointing out all of Flat Earth was fucking...
And somehow
all
that evolved
shit.
seamlessly into Russia trying to help candidate Donald Trump.
All the conspiracy shit on the internet, basically. I had already pointed out by 2015, by April 2015.
What the Mueller report spells out today from page 1 is that Russia started off with a plan to hurt America, to undermine American democracy. I mean, including sending employees from this internet troll farm over to the United States as early as mid-2014 on an intelligence gathering mission in the United States. Donald Trump was nowhere near any presidential politics in 2014. But they already literally had operatives here on an intel gathering mission for this ongoing Russian effort. The Russian government was already working on this years-long effort to try to hurt us, to try to somehow specifically infect and rot our electoral system and faith in U.S. democracy. They started working on it in 2014. Then they get their vehicle to glom that ongoing operation onto. And that vehicle is the candidacy of Donald J. Trump. Quote, by February 2016, internal IRA documents referred to support for the Trump campaign. As early as March 2016, they are purchasing online ads that overtly oppose the Clinton campaign. Quote, for example, on March 18th, 2016, the IRA purchased an advertisement depicting candidate Clinton and a caption that read in part, if one day God lets this liar enter the White House as president, that day would be a real national tragedy. At the same time, they go all in for Trump. Quote, the first known IRA advertisement explicitly...
Mr. Conway, you got a hangover? You forgot to click the like button again.
The IRA bought an advertisement for its Instagram account, Tea Party News, asking U.S. persons to help them make a patriotic team of young Trump supporters by uploading photos with the hashtag #KidsForTrump. It was Russia who was trying to get the hashtag #KidsForTrump trending using their Tea Party fake online avatars, which were actually operated from St. Petersburg in Russia. Because that hashtag #KidsForTrump, that was the spring 2016 evolution of the overall long-running, by that point, years-long running effort to do whatever they could to try to destroy American democracy. Why did they think supporting candidate Donald Trump would do that? I mean, Russia presumably is not trying to make America great again. Right? They are running an op, an ongoing op that well preceded the Trump effort to try to weaken us as much as they can. When Trump came along, they decided...
I feel like I should be tired, but I'm not. I feel well rested already.
How come?
And I only slept for like 4 hours.
We learned from Robert Mueller's report today A few things that were total surprises, at least to me. We learned from Mueller's report today that it was not just the Internet Research Agency, this online troll farm that was doing all the online propaganda and social media stuff. Mueller says they obtained evidence that it was other Russian entities that were also running similar active measures campaigns to try to help Trump win and to try to hurt Hillary Clinton.
Active measures, there it
Oddly,
is.
they say, quote, this office, meaning the special counsel's office, has shared that evidence with other offices of the Department of Justice and the FBI. What other offices? Is somebody else working on that now? Other entities in Russia besides the Internet Research Agency that were doing this social media and online and propaganda and disinformation stuff to try to infect the U.S. government, the U.S. election on behalf of the Russian Federation to benefit Trump? There were other Russian entities doing that part of it? Apparently, and those things have been referred to other entities in the FBI and the Justice Department. Who are they? What are they investigating? What does that relate to? That's actually a surprisingly recurring theme throughout the Mueller report. I mean, we're going to talk tonight about the 12 cases that Mueller has referred for prosecution, referred to other law enforcement entities for prosecution. 12 of the 14 of them are totally blacked out in this report. We're not allowed to know who those entities are or if they are yet being prosecuted or by whom. We just know that those dozen cases have been referred by Mueller for potential prosecution. Who are those? We'll also talk about the 2 active cases that Mueller apparently started prosecuting that have now been handed off to other prosecutors, but those are cases where we don't know who the defendants are. I mean, there's this big, long list in the report of all the cases we know about that Mueller has handed off, right? Manafort, Flynn, Gates, Bijan Keon, Roger Stone, the GRU case, Sam Patton, Konstantin Kilimnik, this big, long list.
Bijan.
But then there's these other 2 cases that Mueller has handed off, not referred them for prosecution, but transferred the handling of those extant investigations and prosecutions to other law enforcement entities. But those extant cases, they're redacted. We don't know who they are. We'll talk about that a little more this hour in terms of figuring out what exactly is the scale of what the special counsel has been doing here. But check this out, too. I mean, here's a whole nother category of information Mueller appears to have developed in this investigation that is also somewhere else at this point. Quote, for more than the past year, the FBI embedded personnel at the special counsel's office who did not work on the special counsel's investigation, but whose purpose was to review the results of the investigation and to send, in writing, summaries of foreign intelligence and counterintelligence information to FBI headquarters and FBI field offices. Those communications and other correspondence between the special counsel's office and the FBI contain information derived from the investigation, not all of which is contained in this volume. In other words, hey, intelligence committees, come and get it. All of the foreign intelligence and counterintelligence stuff that has turned up in this investigation that is not in this report, we've had FBI agents operating in this office, committing all that stuff, in writing it, conveying it to other elements of U.S. law enforcement and counterintelligence work, and that's not here, but we're letting you know that exists so that you can go get it. Okay. We saw Adam Schiff and other members of the intelligence committees asking how the counterintelligence part of this investigation would be handled in terms of this public-facing report. Now we know at least a categorical designation of that evidence. They just didn't put in here, but they let us know that it exists so that the intelligence committees presumably can go and obtain it. That said, there is a lot of material here. There's so much more here than I thought we would get. I mean, just like scraping the surface, just top of my head, not even the most important stuff. But we finally get the explanation for the whole Peter Smith story. Remember that story? The guy who killed himself, Republican activist who killed himself shortly after telling a reporter for the Wall Street Journal that he had been contacting hackers online to try to get Hillary Clinton's emails to benefit the Trump campaign. Turns out that effort, according to the special counsel's office, that effort by Peter Smith actually started with a request from Donald Trump himself in the course of his campaign that they needed to figure out ways to find emails. Soon-to-be National Security Advisor Mike Flynn took that request from Donald Trump himself and pitched that request to Peter Smith. And that's how that whole effort started, which ended with Smith's suicide. It also turns out that the Trump Tower meeting offer to give the Trump campaign dirt on Hillary Clinton from Russian sources, turns out that was not the only
Was
offer
it really
of
a fucking
Russia-related dirt on
suicide?
Hillary Clinton. Turns out Jared Kushner also fielded another previously unreported offer of Russia-related Hillary Clinton dirt from yet another source, this time at a meeting in his New York office in August 2016. Turns out Jared Kushner also had an American friend of his sit down with a representative from Vladimir Putin's office, whereupon the two of them wrote up a plan that would result in dropping sanctions on Russia. They gave this plan to Jared Kushner. He received it, and then he received it from his friend who was working with Putin's guy, and Jared then personally delivered it both to the White House and to the U.S. State Department. Because sure, that's how that kind of material should be handled. We also got a national security horror movie plot when it comes to Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort, who is currently serving a federal prison sentence. In the report, we learned that Trump hired as his campaign chairman a man who by then had spent more than a decade working to provide, quote, political risk insurance for a Russian oligarch close to Vladimir Putin. The oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, quote, used Manafort to install friendly political officials in countries where Deripaska had business interests.
Wow.
Manafort's job for more than a decade before he started working for Trump was that he installed friendly political officials in office on behalf of a Kremlin-connected oligarch. The oligarch paid him to install people in high office in foreign countries for the convenience of the Kremlin. That was Donald Trump's campaign chair. And incidentally, that
they did it here.
in the spring of 2017 turns out to be right. The explicit terms of Manafort's arrangement with this oligarch, quote, referenced the need to brief the Kremlin and referenced the benefits that the work could confer on the Putin government. Well, the benefits for the Putin government, they need to be kept fully apprised on Manafort's work to bring about those benefits by installing friendly officials in foreign countries. That's who Trump brought on to run his campaign. And we're going to be talking about this for a long while yet. There is a ton here. But I mean, just for the purposes of tonight, you should know that Manafort did repeatedly send detailed internal polling data from the Trump campaign to a Russian guy who, it was understood, would also send that information to this Kremlin-connected oligarch. He repeatedly provided internal polling data to that Russian guy. At an in-person meeting in August 2016, Manafort provided this Russian intermediary, this Russian guy who was his intermediary with Deripaska. He was also a guy linked to Russian intelligence, who was elsewhere described in Mueller's report today as acting on behalf of the Russian government. Manafort, in August 2016, provided him, in person, a briefing on the state of Trump's campaign, Manafort's specific plan as Trump's campaign chairman for how Trump could win the election, the Trump campaign's planned messaging for the end of the presidential campaign, yet more internal polling data from the Trump campaign, although he'd been feeding him that for months, plus, quote, a discussion of battleground states, which Manafort identified to his Russian contact, again in August 2016, as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. So Manafort, according to
Those states I was talking
lied,
about,
including to prosecutors with whom he had entered into a plea agreement,
ain't that a
repeatedly
bitch?
lied about his contacts with that Russian guy who was his intermediary with the oligarch. He repeatedly lied about his contacts with him, repeatedly lied about what he gave that guy from Trump's campaign, repeatedly lied about their ongoing work and discussions on yet another plan that would result in the U.S. dropping sanctions against Putin's government. Because Mueller's team was unable to rely on anything that Manafort told them because he was constantly lying to them, and without them being able to access many of Manafort's communications, many of which were sent via encrypted applications, without them being able to track what happened to that valuable campaign information that Manafort sent to his Russian contact, with the understanding that he would send it on to this Kremlin-connected oligarch, without the ability to follow this to its ends, the special counsel say they come to no conclusions as to what happened with all that stuff that Trump's campaign chair sent over to Russia, and whether or not that stuff really was a help or not in Russia's then vociferous and robust efforts to help Trump target and turn out his voters and to target and suppress Hillary Clinton's voters. So, I mean, like I said, we're just scratching the surface here. If nothing else ever happens in the news in the next year, I will be busy for the next year, at least. I mean, these 448 still redacted pages that we got today, it's like walking into a vineyard and you just like eat the skin off a single grape. Like, honestly, we could spend a week here just on what happened with Eric Prince and Steve Bannon and how it is that either of them has thus far avoided being charged. But honestly, the real shock of what we got today. Volume 1 is about the Russian interference in the election and the contacts, the myriad and many previously unexplained contacts between Russian individuals and people associated with the Trump campaign. That's Volume 1. The shock of what we got today, I think, is Volume 2. It's a 182-page-long case, essentially, that the special counsel laid out for charging the President of the United States with obstruction of justice. And honestly, that's what it is. That's what Volume 2 of this report is. It's a roadmap for how to charge this president with multiple felony counts of obstruction of justice. Contrary to the direct assertions from Attorney General William Barr, the special counsel didn't just inexplicably decide that they weren't going to decide whether the president criminally obstructed justice. It is amazing that William Barr lied about that so many times and so blatantly when, in this report, Mueller actually spells out exactly what he was doing about his charging decisions on obstruction. And it's not even in legalese. It's totally clear, blunt, understandable by those of us who are not lawyers. And it is a case that makes sense and that Barr lied about, that Barr presented to the public in a way diametrically opposite to what Mueller says here himself. Check it out. This is what Mueller actually says. Quote, "A traditional prosecution or declination decision entails a binary determination to initiate or decline a prosecution. But we determined not to make a traditional prosecutorial judgment when it came to obstruction of justice. The Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice has issued an opinion finding that the indictment or criminal prosecution of a sitting president would impermissibly undermine the capacity of the executive branch to perform its constitutionally assigned functions." So the OLC has a Justice Department policy which says you can't indict or prosecute a sitting president. Quote, "Given the role of the special counsel as an attorney in the Justice Department, given the framework of the special counsel regulations, this office accepted OLC's legal conclusion for the purpose of exercising prosecutorial jurisdiction." So, yeah, that's written by lawyers, but it's not legalese. Like, we can all get that, right? That's Mueller's office saying, hey, we recognize and we appreciate and we accept that we are bound by Justice Department policy. Justice Department policy, for good or for ill, it says you can't prosecute a sitting president. So because of that, because we accept that, we're constrained. We're constrained. We, in this report, can't say, okay, based on X conduct by the president, we believe he should be charged. They say we feel constrained, we cannot do that. For one, they argue, they say that would not be fair to the president. Quote, "Fairness concerns counseled against potentially reaching the judgment that the president committed crimes when no charges can be brought. The ordinary means for an individual to respond to an accusation is through a speedy and public trial with all the procedural protections that surround a criminal case. An individual who believes he was wrong.
So we wanted to charge him, but we couldn't.
To seek to clear his name. In contrast, a prosecutor's judgment that crimes were committed but that no charges will be brought affords no such adversarial opportunity for public name clearing before an impartial adjudicator." And that's a fair enough argument, right? What Mueller's saying here is in the normal course of events, the prosecutor says, you should be charged. You committed a crime. Well, if you shouldn't be charged, if you didn't commit a crime, if you dispute that, you can rebut that assertion from the prosecutors in court. That's the judicial system, right? You can go to court. You get your day in court, you get to disprove that allegation. But if it's not the normal course of events, because you're president, and Justice Department policy says you can't actually be prosecuted, well, in that case, if a prosecutor comes out and says you ought to be prosecuted, you committed a crime, well, you're never going to go to court. They're not going to actually prosecute you. And that means you'll never have a fair opportunity to rebut such an accusation. Right? It's a simple idea. If you can't be prosecuted, the prosecutors say you can't be accused of a crime by prosecutors either. That said, Mueller's office contends it's not like that means you get off scot-free. Quote, while the OLC opinion concludes that a sitting president may not be prosecuted, it recognizes that a criminal investigation during the president's term is permissible. We may not be able to prosecute you, but we can investigate you. Quote, the OLC opinion also recognizes that a president does not have immunity after he leaves office. So even if you can't be charged as president because you can't be prosecuted as president, we can darn sure investigate you, and you can darn sure be charged when you're out of office. You can darn well be charged based on the factual record that we turn up investigating you while you're in office. And then this to me is just remarkable. Quote, given those considerations, the facts known to us, and the strong public interest in safeguarding the integrity of the criminal justice system, we conducted a thorough factual investigation in order to preserve the evidence when memories were fresh and documentary materials were available. If we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also doesn't exonerate him. This is just astonishing, right?
Wow.
This is happening. You'll always be able to say this happened in your lifetime. This is the special counsel saying, we are not allowed by Justice Department policy to say if the president committed crimes here. But we would tell you if we figured out that he didn't commit any crimes. Because we did a thorough examination.
There it is.
If our thorough examination turned up a conclusion that the president committed no crimes, we would tell you that he committed no crimes. We're not in a position to say that. We can't tell you that, given what we turned up in our investigation. Now, we're not allowed to prosecute him now.
What did I tell you?
He can be impeached.
The Barr
He can be
report was
prosecuted when he
full of
leaves
shit.
office. But they say, here is the factual record of what he did. And how all these multiple instances of obstruction of justice by the president basically fit the various predicates for prosecution. And then it's 180 pages of this stuff. In conclusion, at the end of Volume 2, they say our investigation found multiple acts by the president that were capable of exerting undue influence over law enforcement investigations, including the Russian interference and obstruction investigations. The incidents were often carried out through one-on-one meetings in which the president sought to use his official power outside of usual channels. These actions range from efforts to remove the special counsel and to reverse the effect of the Attorney General's recusal, to the attempted use of official power to limit the scope of the investigation, to direct and indirect contacts with witnesses with the potential to influence their testimony. The president's efforts to influence the investigation were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out the orders or accede to his requests. Comey didn't end the investigation of Flynn, which ultimately resulted in Flynn's prosecution and conviction for lying to the FBI. McGahn didn't tell the acting attorney general that the special counsel must be removed, but was instead prepared to resign over the president's order. Lewandowski and Dearborn didn't deliver the president's message to Sessions that he should confine the Russia investigation to only future election meddling. McGahn refused to recede from his recollections about events surrounding the president's direction to have the special counsel removed, despite the president's multiple demands that he do so. Consistent with that pattern, the evidence we obtained would not support potential obstruction charges against the president's aides and associates beyond those already filed. And what is left tacit there is that the evidence they obtained would support potential obstruction charges against the president himself, if only he weren't the president. But they also note he won't be forever, and part of the way he could leave the presidency is via impeachment if Congress chose to follow this roadmap, where it quite obviously leads. Like I said, this is like grape one in the vineyard. There's a lot to get to, and we have some very, very special guests here tonight to help us get through it. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube.
Wow. I'm fucking blown away. I can only wonder what's still going on the counterintelligence side of things. I would think the counterintelligence investigation is ongoing because of sources and methods. Yes, indeed. All the language suggests that they'll be going after him when he's no longer president. Oh, is that a different one? But wait, there's more.
With all that USA offers, why go with anybody else? We know their rates are good. You know, they're always going to take care of us.
The instant savings, I should have changed a long time ago.
For the tennies, and we're USA members for life.
YouTube's getting unskippable ads this time. Not letting you skip an ad on
Thank
the
you all
matter
for joining us
report.
this hour as well. Happy Friday. Why did the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, enter into a proper session with prosecutors during the course of the Mueller investigation? Why did one of the Republicans who received a top-level confidential intelligence briefing on the FBI's investigation of the president and his campaign turn right around after receiving that confidential briefing and take that information straight to the White House to let them know the state of the FBI's investigation and who that investigation was targeting? Why did a Trump cabinet official tell prosecutors that President Trump had not asked him to intervene to try to stop the FBI's investigation, when that same Trump cabinet official told multiple members of his own staff that the president had done just that? And I could go on. I mean, it turns out even the redacted version of the Mueller report is like a really good ragu. It's just better the second day. You know, same thing about like sometimes Chinese takeout too. Like, it's good when you get it, but after it's sat overnight in the fridge chilling for a little while, next day, tastier. Maybe less overwhelming than when it first came off the stove. You get more out of it on day two. We got a lot going on this hour. We're going to talk about all those questions I just raised right at the top here. But I want to start with one aspect of the part of Mueller's report that led to dramatic headlines like this all across the country today. The Fresno Bee in Fresno, California. Mueller, Trump tried to thwart inquiry. The Tuscaloosa News in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Trump attempted to thwart probe. The Wichita Eagle in Wichita, Kansas. Mueller reveals Trump's efforts to thwart inquiry. The Washington Post. Mueller details Russian interference, Trump's attempts to disrupt probe. The Portland Press-Herald in Portland, Maine. Mueller lays out evidence of obstruction against Trump. The Sentinel Record in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Mueller reveals Trump's attempt to choke off Russia probe. Those were the headlines in papers large and small across the country today. And one of the things we got from Mueller in the section of his redacted report that assesses the subject of all those headlines, that assesses the potential criminal liability for the president, specifically on the issue of obstruction of justice. One of the things we got is a really specific, factual account of multiple instances of the president's behavior that might fall under the rubric of obstruction of justice. And it's all stuff that is based on sworn statements and evidence. We've got references to exactly where they got all of the evidence that they got that supports the narrative that they laid out. We get full names
What's
of
up?
people who provided them with that evidence. We get places.
Happy 420.
We get times. We get any corroborating evidence. We get dates for everything. It's like a full-blown receipt, an itemized receipt for exactly what happened. And we get that on all of them. I mean, just pick your favorite here. I mean, there are 10 broad categories of obstruction of justice by the president that are described in Volume 2 of Mueller's report. Each of those 10 broad categories has multiple components and multiple acts by the president. I mean, just pick one. I mean, here, I'll show you what I mean about the details here. In the table of contents, this is just picking one almost at random. This is the first item under the heading, the president's efforts to curtail the special counsel investigation. You see there, subsection 1. The president asks Corey Lewandowski to deliver a message to Attorney General Jeff Sessions to curtail the special counsel investigation. I mean, now I could have picked any of these. Literally, just the table of contents for the president's 30 pages long, single-spaced, small font. But I like this. I like this example in particular.
The video fucked
Not
up.
because it's the best one or it's the worst one, but because this one I like because
President's
in the
obstruction of
middle
justice
the
is 30
narrative, and
pages
this was a
long.
detailed narrative with this one. You can tell there's this moment where the president thinks he has come up with a genius idea. Eureka! He has a capital I idea that will solve everything. And it basically leaps off the page that the president thinks he has nailed this one. Here's how the account of this one starts. Quote, on June 19th, 2017, the president met one-on-one in the Oval Office with his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. Senior White House advisors described Lewandowski as a devotee of the president, and said the relationship between the president and Lewandowski was close. During that June 19th, 2017 meeting, Lewandowski recalled that after some small talk, the president brought up Jeff Sessions and criticized his recusal from the Russia investigation. The president then asked Lewandowski to deliver a message to Sessions and said, quote, write this down. This was the first time the president had asked Mr. Lewandowski to take dictation. And Lewandowski wrote as fast as possible to make sure he captured the content correctly. So here's the president having a brainwave. He has come up with something that will solve the Jeff Sessions being recused from the Russia investigation thing once and for all. Corey, write this down. Corey, write this down. Get a pen. Bite off the tip of your finger and write it in blood. I just had a thought. Get this down. I got something here. Quote, the president directed that Sessions should give a speech publicly announcing, I know that I recused myself from certain things having to do with specific areas, but our POTUS, our president of the United States, is being treated very unfairly. He shouldn't have a special prosecutor / counsel because he hasn't done anything wrong. I was on the campaign with him for 9 months. There were no Russians involved with him. I know it for a fact because I was there. He didn't do anything wrong except he ran the greatest campaign in American history. So that's the speech that Jeff Sessions is supposed to give. Mueller says, quote, the dictated message went on to state that Sessions would meet with the special counsel to limit his jurisdiction to future election interference. Now a group of people, this is what, again, Sessions is supposed to say, now a group of people want to subvert the Constitution of the United States. I am going to meet with the special prosecutor to explain this is very unfair and let the special prosecutor move forward with investigating election meddling for future elections so that nothing can happen in future elections. Aha! See? You can just see, like, the president thinking this out. Like, you can see the smoke coming out of his ears. You can almost smell it, right? I mean, you can see him thinking, this is not firing the special counsel. 2 days before this meeting with Corey Lewandowski, 2 days previous to that meeting, he had told White House counsel Don McGahn that Don McGahn should fire Robert Mueller, should fire the White House special counsel. That's detailed in here, too. Don McGahn refused that demand from the president, said he would quit. It was a big pain in the neck. But this, you can see the president thinking his way through this. This is genius. What he'll arrange through Corey Lewandowski, private citizen at this point, no role in the administration whatsoever, he'll arrange it through Corey Lewandowski. He loves Corey. He will arrange that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, will unrecuse himself from the Russia investigation. He will rescind his recusal. And then, once he's unrecused, Jeff Sessions won't fire Mueller. Now he knows that would be a problem. Instead, Jeff Sessions will just tell Mueller, hey, from here on out, I'm redirecting your investigation. So from here on out, it's only about crimes in the future. You, Robert Mueller, you have to leave all the crimes in the past alone. You're so unfair. You can only investigate future crime from here on out. Quote, the president said that if Sessions delivered that statement, he would be the most popular guy in the country. Corey Lewandowski told the president he understood what the president wanted Sessions to do. Write this down, Corey. I've got a great idea. The redacted report then goes on to explain that Corey Lewandowski, in fact, doesn't go deliver this message to Jeff Sessions. He tries. He makes an appointment with Jeff Sessions, but Jeff Sessions cancels, and then Lewandowski doesn't really know what to do, so he puts the thing that he dictated from Trump in a safe. One thing we learned in this report is that lots of people around President Trump not only have safes at home, they use them whenever the president asks them to do something that really seems illegal. But after Corey Lewandowski doesn't give the message to Jeff Sessions and instead gives the message to a locked safe, the president asks Lewandowski again, calls him back in for another one-on-one meeting. Did you tell Sessions? They have another meeting in the Oval Office where the president asks Corey Lewandowski to deliver this message to Sessions again, or else. And the or else here is similarly genius. Back to the report. In the follow-up meeting, quote, in the July 19th meeting with Lewandowski, the president raised his previous request and asked if Lewandowski had talked to Sessions. Lewandowski told the president that the message would be delivered soon. Soon, boss, soon. Lewandowski recalled that the president then told him that if Sessions did not meet with him, Lewandowski should tell Sessions that he was fired. So you go meet with the Attorney General, and you give him this message from the president that tells the Attorney General that he needs to unrecuse himself, he needs to give a speech about how terrible the special counsel is, and about how Donald Trump ran the greatest presidential campaign in history, and then he needs to announce that now that he's unrecused, he's changing the mandate of the special counsel, so from here on out, Robert Mueller can only investigate any crimes that are going to take place in the future, nothing that already happened. And, Corey, if Jeff Sessions won't meet with you to receive this message about what he's going to do, well then you, Corey, you fire him. You, political consultant who used to work for my campaign, who is now just a random private citizen, you fire the Attorney General. You say, I, Corey Lewandowski, fire you. This is how it's going to work, right? Genius plan. After that point, more hilarity ensues, including Corey Lewandowski then trying to make someone else do this. He taps somebody else to give this message to Jeff Sessions about what Sessions is supposed to do. He tells the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Rick Dearborn, to do it. Mr. Dearborn does not do it. But then, I mean, we get all of this very specific narrative of when and how that all happened, and how we know that all happened. You know, we get the date of the first demand from the president. Hey, Corey, write this down. That's June 19th, 2017. We get the date of the president meeting with Lewandowski again to reiterate the demand and to say the backup plan, if this doesn't work, is the Attorney General being fired by a random citizen. That's July 19th, 2017. We get footnote after footnote after footnote in this section of the report saying exactly which FBI interview on which date and at which page of the FBI's record of that interview Corey Lewandowski provided this information to the investigation. Also, Rick Dearborn, too, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, the guy who Corey Lewandowski tried to hand off this cockamamie plan to. We get all of these details, including specific references to their FBI interviews and the 302s, the 302 forms which the FBI used to memorialize those interviews. And then we get, I mean, as cockamamie as this was, as ridiculous as this was as a scheme, we then get Mueller and his team, in all seriousness, explaining how you would charge something like this as a crime. And they do this for all of these instances of potential criminal obstruction by the president, under the heading Analysis. In analyzing the president's efforts to have Lewandowski deliver a message directing Sessions to publicly announce that the special counsel investigation would be confined to future election interference, the following evidence is relevant to the elements of obstruction of justice. And then the first discussion is of the obstructive act. What constitutes the obstructive act? There's a long discussion of all of the elements of what the president did exactly, concluding, quote, the president's directives indicate that Sessions was being instructed to tell the special counsel to end the existing investigation into the president and his campaign. then the next element of obstruction of justice as a criminal matter is nexus to an official proceeding, which you have to show if you're going to prove this is criminal obstruction of justice. In this case, they're very blunt, and they say, yes, there is a nexus to an official proceeding. Quote, by the time of the president's initial one-on-one meeting with Lewandowski on June 19th, 2017, the existence of a grand jury investigation supervised by the special counsel was public knowledge. So that's the nexus to an official proceeding. And then there's one last element. There's the third element you need to establish criminal obstruction of justice, and that is intent. Quote, substantial evidence indicates that the president's efforts to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president's and his campaign's conduct. The president knew that the Russia investigation was focused in part on his campaign, and he perceived allegations of Russian interference to cast doubt on the legitimacy of his election. The president further knew that the investigation had broadened to include his own conduct and whether he had obstructed justice. Those investigations would not proceed if the special counsel's jurisdiction were limited to future election interference only. I mean, which is obvious as a logical matter, right? You and me, we're not lawyers just looking at this stuff like, yeah, duh. If you can only, if the investigator is now only allowed to investigate stuff that hasn't happened yet, right? I mean, it seems obvious, but you're spelling out intent here for why an alleged perpetrator could be charged or should be convicted of this as crime. And as such, you belabor the point. You spell it all out. Quote, the manner in which the president acted provides additional evidence of his intent. Rather than rely on official channels, the president met with Lewandowski alone in the Oval Office. The president selected a loyal devotee outside the White House to deliver the message, supporting an inference that he was working outside White House channels, including that of White House counsel Don McGahn, who had just 2 days previously resisted contacting the Justice Department about the special counsel. The president also did not contact Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, the acting Attorney General, on the Russia matter, who had just testified publicly that there was no cause to remove the special counsel. Instead, the president tried to use Jeff Sessions to restrict and redirect the special counsel's investigation when Sessions was recused and could not properly take any action on it. Quote, the July 19th, 2017 events, the second meeting, provide further evidence of the president's intent. The president followed up with Lewandowski in a separate one-on-one meeting 1 month after he first dictated the message for Sessions, demonstrating that he still sought to pursue the request. You do not need this level of detail. You do not need this much chapter and verse on intent. And all of this overt spelling out of the 3 elements that constitute criminal obstruction of justice, right? Obstructive act, nexus to an official proceeding, intent. You don't need all of that if you're just trying to inform the public about what the president's like behind closed doors or how this plot unfolded. I mean, you certainly don't lay all that out in order to show that the president definitely didn't obstruct justice here. I mean, this is laid out to show that he did. And to lay it out specifically as a predicate for criminal charges. This is laid out so that this can be charged. And it's not brought here in this report in the form of actual criminal charges being unveiled against the president. There is no accompanying indictment that goes along with this, right? And spells out why, right? Mueller explains explicitly in his redacted report that he is bound by Justice Department policy that does not allow for the indictment or prosecution of the president. And so, therefore, he could not bring charges. He couldn't bring a prosecution. He couldn't say explicitly, here, this is a crime, because if the president can't be hauled into court to face charges, he can't avail himself of the court either to prove his innocence. And so instead, we get this roadmap from Mueller, explaining in detail precisely what the president did and the evidence that proves it, the admissible evidence that proves it, and how it fits every element you need to prove under the criminal law in order to support a criminal charge of obstruction of justice for this type of behavior. About which former Attorney General Eric Holder was quite blunt today. Looking at this evidence and the way that Mueller laid this out, this is what Holder said today, quote, any, all caps, any competent public corruption prosecutor would bring obstruction charges against Trump and win. Only reason Mueller did not was because of the flawed Justice Department restriction against indicting a sitting president. Well, flawed or not, that is the Justice Department policy. Mueller felt bound by it. And so now, instead of an indictment of the president, we've got his roadmap for how one might prosecute this behavior by President Trump. But who's supposed to follow this map? Why lay it out like this with all of the different elements that you need to show in order to bring charges? With all of the evidence laid out, not just the factual record, but how it fits the statute. Who's this roadmap for? Mueller explicitly raises two possibilities. And it's funny, only one of these is being discussed in the wake of the report, but in the report there's very clearly there's two. The one that nobody's talking about is from page 1 of the obstruction section of the report. It's explicit, it's not even legalese. While the OLC opinion, this Justice Department opinion, concludes that a sitting president may not be prosecuted, it recognizes that a criminal investigation during the president's term is permissible. An investigation during the president's term is permissible. The OLC opinion also recognizes that a president does not have immunity after he leaves office. And then there's a footnote just to put the second exclamation point on that, citing the OLC memo that says you can't bring charges against a sitting president, but quoting this exact part of it. Quote, recognizing an immunity from prosecution for a sitting president would not preclude such prosecution once the president's term is over. And this is something nobody is talking about in the wake of the Mueller report. At least nobody's broadly talking about it. But this is why Mueller says he did his report this way, right? If you uncover crimes that there can be no charges, why bother uncovering the crimes, right? Well, he says because the immunity that prevents the perp from being charged in this case, that's a fleeting thing. That doesn't last forever. And so it's not only worth investigating, it's worth laying down what looks like chargeable conduct here and why. As Mueller says it, quote, given those considerations, the facts known to us, and the strong public interest in safeguarding the integrity of the criminal justice system, we conducted a thorough factual investigation in order to preserve the evidence when memories were fresh and documentary materials were available. Why are you preserving the evidence? Preserving it for whom? Here's your roadmap. Because, as Mueller says explicitly, when Donald Trump is no longer president, there's no restriction on charging him. And here's how you do it on these charges. By the way, the statute of limitations on obstruction of justice is 5 years. 5 years from the last criminal act that could be charged. So how long would prosecutors have here? How long does the president have to make sure he stays in office to avoid these potential charges? Well, I mean, we get a lot of detail, including a lot of specific dates in this narrative. It's not just a book about the presidency, it's receipts, right? So the president directs KT McFarland to write an email swearing that Trump didn't tell Mike Flynn to call the Russian government about sanctions. That was on February 23rd, 2017. Add 5 years, okay, statute of limitations there extends to February 23rd, 2022. The president personally directed that a public statement about the Trump Tower meeting delete a proposed line that acknowledged that Don Jr. expected at that meeting to obtain information helpful to the Trump campaign. That, we know from the Mueller report, was July 8th, 2017. When would the statute of limitations expire on that? Add 5 years, July 8th, 2022. The president cleared everyone except James Comey out of the Oval Office before asking Comey, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. That was on February 14th, 2017. Excuse me, 2017. Statute of limitations expires on that one, February 14th, 2022. Happy Valentine's Day. The president called Don McGahn and directed him to contact Attorney General Jeff Sessions and have him relay the message that Special Counsel Mueller had conflicts of interest and must be removed. That was June 17th, 2017. Add 5 years, statute of limitations expires June 17th, 2022. The president met with Corey Lewandowski and dictated a message for him to give to Sessions, saying that Sessions should publicly announce the investigation was very unfair to the president. And from then on, the special counsel should only move forward investigating election meddling for future elections. That initial meeting was June 19th, 2017. And there was a follow-up meeting a month later, July. July 2017, at 5 years. July 2022. Special counsel laid out the obstructive act, the nexus to an official proceeding, and the evidence for intent on all of these. If President Trump is not reelected, he will be out of office in January 2021. At that point, he will no longer be immune from prosecution. He will still be well within the statute of limitations on all of the alleged felony counts of criminal obstruction of justice that are laid out in this report. Those don't expire for more than a year after he leaves office. If he is reelected, he will definitely still be in office while the statute of limitations on all those potential crimes expires and he can no longer be prosecuted for them. How's that for a re-election bumper sticker, right? 4 more years, 4 more years, so he can run up the statute of limitations on multiple felony charges over and above them. Over, they named him Individual 1 and SDNY on 2 campaign finance felonies already. 4 more years for that. That'll fit. I mean, they'll make it rhyme. They'll fit it on a hat. Of course, in the United States, we have never had a situation where a president left office and then was charged with crimes he committed while being president. Ford pardoned Nixon as soon as Ford was sworn into office, so we never got to test that when it came to Nixon. One of the senior Watergate prosecutors resigned in protest that day. Bill Clinton entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the successor to Ken Starr on his final day in office as president to avoid being charged with lying to investigators about his extramarital affair. They were actively working with a grand jury to consider indicting Bill Clinton as soon as he left office for lying to investigators about his affair. On his last day in office, they came to a deal, a non-prosecution deal. He would not be charged once he was no longer president, but he had to pay a $25,000 fine and give up his law license for 5 years. That deal was announced on his last day in office. So we have been very close to charging ex-presidents with crimes they allegedly committed while in office as president. So far, we haven't got there. Robert Mueller, however, has laid out a 182-page path for doing just that, even just on obstruction of justice. Unless, of course, President Trump is going to face the music on this stuff the other way, that is laid out in the Constitution, that is envisioned by the Justice Department regulations that prohibit him being charged while he is a sitting president. The other way that is laid out elegantly in Mueller's report in the introduction to the obstruction section. Quote, the conclusion that Congress may apply the obstruction laws to the president's corrupt exercise of the powers of office accords with our constitutional system of checks and balances and the principle that no person is above the law. That, of course, is about impeachment, right? That's the other way the president could be effectively prosecuted for these alleged crimes, using the roadmap, using the evidence laid out by Robert Mueller in this report. That remedy, the impeachment remedy, is broadly viewed as politically impossible, not least of which because Democrats don't want to go there. Maybe. Today, that started to change, and in one way in particular, that could end up being a very big deal. And that is the subject of our next segment and our next interview. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Hey there, I'm Chris.
Well, so it is now about 4:20 here in the central time zone of the United States. And I'm smoking a cigarette. So Nadler has subpoenaed the entire redacted Mueller report. And it seems as though we're going to wind up with an impeachment proceeding, if you ask me. Well, let's see what Adam Schiff says.
And joining me now, the Democratic chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. A lot to talk over. You were one of the earliest to say, follow the money. What we need to do is follow the money. And you were objecting to the fact that your Republican then chair, Devin Nunes, and those who followed him when he allegedly recused, which he really didn't, as we later discovered, were not going after subpoenas, Deutsche Bank and others, which House chairs now are going after. So what about this whole issue of following the money and sort of the dog that didn't bark in the Mueller report was all of the financial entanglements? Is that being pursued by SDNY?
Well, you know, Pete was right in saying that there's very little discussion of those issues in the Mueller report. But I don't think it's because Mueller chose not to spend time on it. I think it was likely that Mueller decided, or Rod Rosenstein decided for him, that this was beyond the scope of what he was allowed to look at. And that's of great concern, because it means that if there is a form of a financial entanglement, apart from the most graphic conflict of interest, that being the president's effort to secure Kremlin help to build this tower in Moscow during the campaign and all the deceit around that, if there is other financial entanglement, that may be driving his decisions vis-a-vis Russia, meaning we're not protected from Russian malign influence in this country. Another possible explanation, though, is Mueller makes clear in his report that there is a parallel counterintelligence investigation, that there are FBI agents embedded in his team who are producing counterintelligence reports. Those reports go to whether the president or people around him may be acting either wittingly or unwittingly under Russian influence, and that can be financial influence. So we are going to get those reports from the department. We've demanded them, in fact, in an odd, and bipartisan way. Odd, I say, because it's rare that Mr. Nunes will go along with the majority on anything. But he and I have requested all of this information, the underlying documents, and we're prepared to subpoena those as well if the Justice Department does not follow the legal requirement that provides that they must give that to the committee.
To the committee, to just you and the ranking member? How is this going to work?
Well, the obligation under the National Security Act is to provide that foreign intelligence and counterintelligence information to our committee. But we are very conscious as a broader matter that we don't want the Justice Department to hide behind the Gang of Eight or even hide behind the Intelligence Committee and shield from the other members of Congress information they need to determine how to do their jobs in Congress and how to hold this administration accountable and how to protect the country. So we want to make sure that the information that we get is made available to other members in an appropriate fashion so that we can take necessary steps. And I think that's absolutely essential, and that may be we need greater sanctions on Russia, we need greater election protections. The administration is doing frighteningly little to protect us from a recurrence of Russian interference in 2020.
The Secretary of State just said at a news conference that they have been aggressive and that they push back in every single the Russians. Kremlin today denying that they did anything to try to subvert the American election. But you're saying that that's not the case as far as you can tell.
I think very clearly not the case. I mean, what more do we need to look at than Helsinki, where the president quite out in the open said that he trusted Vladimir Putin's denials over the work product of his own intelligence agencies. I think the conclusion that the Kremlin took from that, regardless of what casual comments Mike Pompeo might make in his meetings, is that the President of the United States is too weak to confront Vladimir Putin when it comes to election interference, and as long as they interfere on his side, he may even be grateful. As the Mueller report makes all too clear, the Trump campaign built its campaign messaging and strategy around the knowledge that the Russians had hacked and were going to be dumping these documents. So there's certainly little, I think, indication to the Russians that this president intends to stand up to him and up to Putin in any meaningful way.
Do you think that there could be information in the counterintelligence basket here in the Mueller report that could be the grounds for impeachment?
It certainly is possible that the counterintelligence findings will add to the body of evidence. But frankly, the obstruction of justice material laid out by the special counsel is damning enough. I think what we need to do is really take some time to let settle in the seriousness of what Mueller has set out in this almost a dozen acts or courses of conduct that could amount to obstruction of justice, and determine what the right course is. We certainly need to continue the investigative work to determine, are there other ways this president is compromised, or are there other offenses that rise to the level of removal from office? But here we are less than 24 hours after the report, and I think we need caucus to have a discussion about what's the import of this and what's the way forward.
If you see such evidence, would you proceed for impeachment, even knowing that the Republican Senate would never go along with it by 2/3? So is this a political minefield for Democrats, as Pelosi has privately warned, as Nancy Pelosi has warned all along, that proceeding with impeachment with the Republicans in the Senate against it sets Democrats up to be roundly attacked by the White House and others?
Well, look, I think we have seen a wholesale abdication of responsibility by the GOP leadership, by people like Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, who essentially do whatever the president says, and that includes when the president wants to go around the Congress's power of the purse. But it certainly includes issues of malfeasance, corruption within the administration. There has been little or no appetite to stand up to the president in any meaningful way, and that really has our democracy trembling. An impeachment proceeding cannot be successful if one party decides they're more loyal to their party or to the person of the president than they are to the Constitution and the country. And that is a real structural problem right now. The GOP has no independence from this president. It has made itself effectively a cult of Trump's personality, and I think that really does threaten our democratic institutions. And yes, as Democrats, we're going to have to figure out what does that mean in terms of where we go from here, that we have a GOP so willing to overlook its constitutional obligations. But regrettably, that is where we are.
Adam Schiff, you've got a lot of work ahead of you, the House Chair of Intelligence. Thank you.
So it looks like there just might be an impeachment after all, huh? I think there will be.
Don't go down! Oh, no! Balloon your car! Call me!
A flyby ballooning. Seen it, covered it. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. We are farmers.
Bum, 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 bum.
Most of the discussion of impeachment in the last 20
I got time for Lawrence. Anyway. I miss my wife. Wish there was something I could do to talk to her. I'm just stuck on that, man. I really hope she doesn't file. You know, I just hope she doesn't file. I hope she gives it time to not work with the new guy. I just can't let it go. All we've been through together. I can't believe it was all for nothing. Anyways. How you doing there, Mr. Conway? Still with me? Who's here still? John J. Just said 420 and that was it. He speaks numbers. Good enough. My head's just spinning thinking about how I was accused of treating the one I thought was my daughter like some sort of a golden child, when in fact the exact opposite was true. If anything, I treated the older one like the golden child. Because I knew what it was like to be a stepkid. And I can't even talk about it. I wonder if I'm legally allowed to make a video to my kids. Wish I could just tell them how much I love them and how much I miss them. I think I might do that. Yeah. I'm going to stop this broadcast, and I'm gonna make a specific live stream. Just to share with the girls. It's gonna be private, so y'all have a good night. You're not gonna be able to see this. I'm just gonna film it as a video, just so I can have it up there to share a link. And wish me luck.